I did not catch my husband in bed with another woman. I caught him beneath candlelight, over red wine, at a romantic table that should have been mine. My name is Evelyn Ashford. I am 41 years old, a literature professor at a fictional private school called Briar Glen University. And I had been married to Damian Cole for 17 years. 17 years is long enough for a person to become part of your breathing. I knew Damian drank his coffee without sugar on the mornings he had difficult client meetings. I knew he crumpled the corner of a napkin whenever he was hiding stress. I knew the difference between his polite smile and the real one he used to give me in the early years of our marriage. And because I knew him that well, I could also tell when a man had started pulling his soul out of a home piece by piece. That night, Damian was in the shower. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, the screen lighting up with a short notification from Velours, a restaurant so expensive that even wealthy people booked weeks ahead. Reservation confirmed for 2 guests, 7:30 p.m., private corner as requested. I stared at those words longer than I needed to. I had not made dinner plans with Damian, and there was no chance he had secretly arranged some romantic evening for me because our anniversary was still 2 months away, and lately he had been treating me with such cold irritation that even the mug I left beside the sink seemed to bother him. I wish I had been the kind of woman who could ignore it, the kind who tells herself the restaurant must have sent it by mistake, the kind who chooses peace by refusing to look. But I am a professor. I live through detail, through language, through the things other people overlook. And in my marriage, I had been reading the final period long before anyone was willing to write it. I picked up his phone. The first thing I saw was a pinned message thread at the top. The sender was saved under a ridiculous fake name, Nina Workstream. Damian had never been especially creative when he lied. I opened it. At first, the messages looked harmless enough. What time are you leaving the office today? Don't forget the file. I can't stop thinking about the way you looked at me yesterday. Then I kept reading. The thread went back nearly a year. A year of secret lunches, a year of late meetings, a year of me sitting alone on the sofa, eating reheated leftovers, believing my husband was out building a future for our family while he was spending his time, his attention, and his tenderness on another woman. Her name was Iris Bennett. Her name appeared between heart emojis, teasing comments, memories of hotel rooms, and promises like, "Just give me a little more time." I scrolled down and felt my hand go cold when I saw a photo of 2 champagne glasses clinking together. The caption Damian had sent said, "Soon you won't have to sit at the side table anymore." The side table. I set the phone down very gently, not because I was calm, but because if I had used any more force, I might have shattered the one thing that had just handed me the truth. The water in the bathroom stopped. I had less than a minute to become the wife who knew nothing. I put his phone back exactly where it had been, wiped the screen with the edge of my shirt, as if my fingerprints were a confession of their own. When Damian walked out, hair still damp, towel draped around his neck, he looked at me and gave me the tired little smile I used to believe meant stress. "You're still up?" I looked at the man who had slept beside me for nearly 2 decades, and suddenly I realized the worst part was not that he had betrayed me. The worst part was that he had been living 2 lives right in front of me, while I had remained loyal to someone who no longer existed. I smiled back. "I was waiting for you." And in that moment, a part of me died. But the rest of me woke up. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not throw anything at his face. I simply lay beside Damian in the dark, listening to him breathe like an innocent man, and plan the most unforgettable dinner of my life. Because if my husband wanted a night he would never forget with his mistress, then I was going to make sure he got one, and this time he would not be sitting there alone with his secret. The next morning, I still made Damian coffee. That is what makes betrayal so disgusting. Habit keeps moving even when your heart has just been crushed. I set his dark blue mug in front of him. He thanked me, kissed the top of my hair, and opened his tablet to read the news as though I had not spent the previous night discovering that the words he once gave me now belonged to another woman. Our kitchen was bright from the wide glass windows facing the garden. The lavender pots I had planted outside were in bloom, and the breeze moved the curtains in soft waves. Everything was still beautiful, everything was still intact, and that was exactly what made me feel sick. 17 years earlier, I had met Damien at an academic fundraiser. He had been a young, ambitious lawyer from a fictional law firm called Callow and Reed, and I had been a graduate student who always carried too many colored pens in her bag. He pursued me with a patience that felt rare. He remembered the day I defended my dissertation. He drove 3 hours just to bring me soup when I had the flu. He had once looked at me like I was the last answer he wanted to keep in this life. That is why I believed him for so long. The changes had not come overnight. They came like water through a wall, quietly, slowly, and then one day you realize everything has been rotting for much longer than you thought. Damien started coming home later. He snapped when I asked questions. He touched me less. Our weekend dinners turned into important clients. Short work trips became internal conferences. I blamed myself for being too sensitive. I thought maybe turning 40 had made me insecure. Maybe work had worn him down. Maybe every marriage eventually passed through a quiet phase. No, some marriages go quiet because they are tired, and some go quiet because one person is whispering to somebody else. I started looking into Iris Bennett. She worked in the corporate legal department at the same firm as Damien, 33 years old. Sharp features, polished smile, the kind of woman who clearly knew exactly which angle was most flattering under warm lighting. Her public profile showed that she was married. Her husband was Nathan Bennett, an architect who ran a small but respected design studio called Atelier North. I sat in my home office with the computer screen glowing in front of me, papers from ungraded student essays pushed to one side. On the desk sat a bronze paperclip shaped like a crane, a gift Damien had given me in our 5th year of marriage. I picked it up and turned it between my fingers, then laughed under my breath. The gift was still here. The man who had once chosen it for me was gone. I did not just read messages. I read calendars. I read confirmations. I read gaps. Damien had been careful, but not careful enough for a woman who made a living analyzing texts. I found hotel receipts buried in a rarely used folder. I found calendar notes marked IR dinner. I even found a recurring transfer going out each month to a joint-related account I did not recognize. I did not yet know exactly what it was, but I knew it smelled like a lie. That afternoon, Damien texted me to say he had to entertain an important client at Velour on Friday. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Even after knowing he was cheating, he still chose to add one more lie as casually as if dishonesty had become a cheap thing he could toss around every day. I replied, "That's fine. I'll stay home and grade papers." He sent back a heart emoji. I did not answer again. That night, I opened Nathan Bennett's public profile. On his company website, he stood beside a Maplewood model of a fictional theater project still in progress. His expression looked thoughtful, kind, a little tired. At the end of an interview, I saw that the following week he was scheduled to give a talk about healing spaces in community architecture at a professional symposium. And then the idea came to me, cold and clear as a blade. I did not need to explode at Damien in a fit of rage. I needed to place him somewhere he could no longer lie. I needed a witness. Not my best friend, not my sister, not a lawyer. I needed the one man being betrayed just as I was. I found Nathan Bennett's work contact information. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time. I knew that once I sent this email, I would never again be able to pretend I was the naive wife. But the truth was, I had not been her since the moment I saw that reservation confirmation from Velours. I typed in the most professional tone I could manage. "My name is Evelyn Ashford from Briar Glen University. I am putting together an interdisciplinary discussion on space, memory, and urban literature. I was very impressed by your upcoming talk and would love to invite you to dinner to discuss a possible collaboration. My schedule is unfortunately tight. Would this Friday at 7:15 p.m. at Velours work for you?" I reread every word, not a single direct lie, but not a single innocent word either. I hit send. 3 minutes later, Nathan replied, "It would be my pleasure. I can make that time." I set the phone down, my heart pounding so hard my wrist trembled. Outside, the night wind bent the lavender in the garden. The house was quiet. Damien was downstairs watching a comedy show and laughing every now and then. He had no idea that his wife, sitting upstairs in a cream sweater with blue screen light against her face, had just laid the first stone for the night his marriage would collapse. I did not need to scream to get revenge. I only needed to arrange the seating properly. 2 days before the dinner at Velour, I had to attend a school reception. It was the kind of event where everyone dressed a little too well just to stand around holding sparkling water and pretending to care deeply about one another's research. I almost skipped it. But then I thought, if my life was about to change completely, the least I could do was stop hiding from the life I still had. I wore a dark blue dress that fit neatly, pinned on the pearl earrings my mother had left me, and reminded myself that lifting your chin is not arrogance. Sometimes it is the only way to keep your heart from hitting the floor. Damien did not come with me. He said at the last minute that he had a call with a client. I already knew what client might mean. The reception was held in the glass atrium of the new library building. Warm lights reflected over tall bookshelves, soft strings played in the background, and the smell of baked cheese and white wine floated through the room in a way that was somehow both elegant and suffocating. I spoke with a few colleagues, laughed where appropriate, nodded at the right moments. At one point, I caught my reflection in the glass wall, a composed, respectable, grown woman. No one in that room knew that my life was cracking open. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Damien. "Sorry, I'll be very late. Don't wait up." Attached was a photo of an open file folder on a table, as if to prove he was truly working. But in the reflection on the spoon beside it, I could see a tall cocktail glass with a slice of orange on the rim. No one drank cocktails like that in a meeting room. I stared at the photo. I zoomed in. I could even see the edge of a cream-colored tablecloth. A tiny detail, a hairline crack. But sometimes an entire house comes down from a crack no bigger than that. I put the phone back into my purse just as Professor Miriam Voss, my department chair, walked over. She studied my face for a second and then asked gently, "Are you all right, Evelyn? You're smiling more than usual tonight. Perceptive people can be frightening." "I'm just tired," I said. She nodded. "Don't let other people drain you dry." It was such an ordinary sentence, and yet it hit the exact wound so precisely that I had to turn away and pretend to reach for my glass. On the drive home, I did not start the car right away. I sat in the parking garage with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at the mist collecting on the windshield. I remembered our 3rd year of marriage, when Damien had waited outside the library just to bring me an umbrella because he knew I always forgot one. I remembered our 9th year, after my father died, when Damien had sat on the kitchen floor with me all night without saying a word, just so I would not have to grieve alone. I hate memories. They make traitors look like the decent people they used to be. That night, when Damien got home, he kept up his tired husband performance. He loosened his tie, rubbed the back of his neck, complained about demanding clients. I stood in the kitchen slicing pears into thin pieces for dessert, the knife moving steadily across the cutting board. He came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, as if he still had the right to put his hands on this body. "You smell like vanilla," he said. I nearly shuddered from disgust, but I stayed still. "How was your evening?" I asked in the same soft voice I always used. "Long, just work." "Anything interesting?" "Nothing worth mentioning." I set the knife down. The last pear rolled slightly to one side, its pale green skin shining under the kitchen light. How smoothly can a person lie if they have practiced long enough? I turned and looked at Damien. He was still handsome in that polished, dependable, trustworthy way, the kind of man who made other people think you were lucky to have married him. And maybe that was part of why he had felt so confident cheating. He believed his surface was decent enough that no one would question it. But then I noticed another detail. On the cuff of Damien's shirt was a single fleck of gold glitter. Tiny. So small I would have missed it from a distance. I brushed it off with my fingertips and smiled. He had carried another woman's trace home on his sleeve and never even noticed. A little sparkle, a little confession. That night, after Damien fell asleep, I opened Nathan Bennett's emails again. I needed to make sure I was not dragging an innocent man into a confrontation based on suspicion alone. But the more I reread Damien's messages to Iris, the more certain I became that this was no longer suspicion. It was a structure of lies, a full year built from routines, schedules, and contempt. I decided to send Nathan one more message. "I look forward to Friday. I may arrive a few minutes early. Thank you again for making time." He replied, "Likewise." Just one word. And somehow it made me ache for both of us. Two educated, respectable adults with stable lives, about to sit in an expensive restaurant and watch the ugliest truth of our marriages unfold. I turned off my phone. The room sank into pale blue darkness. I thought I would cry, but I did not. By then, the pain had moved beyond tears. It had become something else, a terrifying kind of clarity. And I knew that when I walked into Velours, I would not walk in as a devastated wife. I would walk in as the woman holding the switch, and all I had to do was flip it once, and every false light they had been living under would go out. Friday arrived slowly, like a sentence being handed down. That morning, Damien was unusually kind. He asked if I wanted to get breakfast out. He offered to call the garage because he thought my tires might need checking. He even kissed my forehead before leaving. Those little gestures would once have made me feel loved. That day, they only made me understand that the best liars are not the ones who tell the biggest lies. They are the ones who scatter small tendernesses at just the right moments so their victims keep doubting their own instincts. I went to campus, taught my class, lectured on classical tragedy. It felt absurd to stand in front of students talking about blindness, pride, and the consequences of hidden truths, while I myself was living through a modern tragedy with brown butter sauce and linen tablecloths. During my break, I received an email from the bank's financial department about an automatic transfer due to process from our joint account. Normally, I would have ignored it because Damien handled most of our investment-related payments, but not today. Today I opened it. The amount was not huge if you looked at 1 month alone, but when I traced it back over the previous 11 months, the total made my chest tighten. Damien had been secretly transferring money into a secondary savings structure I knew nothing about. The payee name was not his. It was a fictional real estate holding company, Harbor Crest Residences Holding. I stared at the screen until the numbers stopped feeling like numbers and became a clear picture. The vague messages about soon, the promises that you won't have to wait much longer, the steady monthly transfers. The dinner at Velour might not just be a date, it might be a celebration for a plan that had been quietly built over months. A new apartment, a new life, paid for with the money from the marriage I had still believed I was protecting. I did not feel jealous anymore. I felt robbed. Later that afternoon, I called Velours. The receptionist's voice was soft and perfectly trained. I reserved a table for 2 at 7:15 under my own name. Then I added that it was an important meeting and I would greatly appreciate a private table by the west glass wall, if possible. "Ma'am," she said politely, "that section is almost completely booked." I smiled, though she could not see it. "I understand, but I think your restaurant may be able to help me if I explain that the man who reserved a table for 2 at 7:30 tonight under the name Damien Cole is my husband." Silence. I did not threaten her. I did not make a scene. I simply let the pause stretch long enough and then said calmly, "I am not planning to create any disturbance. I just need a table very close to his." Her voice lowered. "Let me see what I can do." 10 minutes later, she called back. "We were able to arrange a table directly beside his, ma'am." I thanked her as if she had just helped me plan a birthday dinner. By evening, Nathan Bennett texted to confirm he would arrive on time. I replied briefly, "Thank you. This dinner may not be what you expect, but I promise you will understand why I invited you." He did not respond immediately. Nearly an hour later, my phone lit up. "That sounds serious. I'll be there." My heart sank. Maybe he sensed something too. Maybe anyone being betrayed long enough eventually starts hearing the wrong rhythm inside their own home. That evening, Damien changed into a fresh shirt, charcoal gray, the kind he wore when he wanted to look expensive and approachable at the same time. He sprayed on the cologne I had given him for our 10th anniversary, cedarwood and bergamot. I had once loved that scent so much I could recognize him by it in a crowded hallway. That day, it made my skin go cold. "Big client?" I asked from the bedroom doorway. "Yeah," he said, fastening his cufflinks. "I may be home very late. Don't stay up." I stepped toward him and smoothed the lapel of his jacket with my own hand. The gesture was so intimate that if anyone had seen us, they would have thought we were a perfectly happy married couple. "Enjoy your evening," I said. Damien smiled. "You're the most understanding woman I've ever known." I kept the smile on my face until the front door closed. Then I stood in the hallway and listened to his car pull out of the driveway. The house immediately seemed too large, too empty, as if over the past year he had been moving his spirit out in quiet trips, and tonight I was finally hearing the last door shut. I changed slowly. Ivory silk dress, black coat, deep red lipstick. Not to look beautiful for Damien, but so that when my life split into a before and after, I would remember that I had walked into that night with my back straight. Before leaving, I opened the bedside drawer and slipped my wedding ring off my finger. The pale mark was still there on my skin. I placed the ring inside a blue velvet box and closed the lid. Such a small sound, but it felt like the lock turning on 17 years. Then I took my keys, went down to the garage, and drove straight to Velour, the place where my husband believed he was about to celebrate a new life with another woman. He had no idea that tonight I was the one bringing the final course to the table. Velour's was beautiful enough to feel offensive. The facade was lined in cream stone, the tall windows reflecting the streetlights like liquid gold. The doorman wore white gloves and greeted me with perfect elegance. Inside, the air smelled of butter, wine, and white flowers. A pianist played something soft and expensive in the corner, the notes drifting through the room as though the world contained no betrayals, no lies, no marriages dying beneath ironed linen. I arrived 10 minutes early. The hostess recognized me at once. The young woman with her hair neatly pinned back and tension in her eyes led me through the main dining room and stopped beside a table near the glass wall. It was only an arm's length away from the next table, Damien's table. "Exactly as requested, ma'am," she whispered. I nodded. "Thank you. There will be no vulgar scene tonight. I simply need the truth to be seated where it belongs." She swallowed hard and stepped away. I sat down. On the table stood a small vase holding 3 white lily-of-the-valley stems. So delicate they looked as if one hard touch would snap them. I set down my purse, folded the napkin over my lap, and ordered still water. My hands were cold, but steady. 3 minutes later, Nathan Bennett arrived. He was taller than I had expected, broad-shouldered, with the tired face of a man accustomed to staying up late for work, not entertainment. His navy suit was understated but impeccably cut. He saw me, offered a polite smile, and walked over. "Dr. Ashford?" I stood to shake his hand. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Bennett." His hand was warm, firm, slightly hesitant. We sat. He glanced at the menu, then set it aside almost immediately. "Your last email made me think this may not actually be an academic dinner." I looked him in the eyes. "No, and I am sorry for using work as a pretext to invite you." Nathan fell silent. I saw his jaw tighten very slightly. Intelligent people rarely need many facts before they begin connecting them on their own. "I'm going to be direct," I said. "My husband is Damien Cole from Callow and Reed." He nodded slowly. "I know the name." "And your wife is Iris Bennett." A silence opened between us. The restaurant around us remained soft and elegant, glasses clinking gently, piano flowing through the room. But at our table, every sound seemed pressed under deep water. Nathan leaned back. "What exactly are you saying?" I took out my phone and slid a screenshot toward him, one of Damien's messages. "Tonight at Velour will be different. This time I want to celebrate us properly." Nathan looked down. He did not blink. He did not touch the phone. He only looked. I said quietly, "They've been involved for nearly a year." Still he did not move. I had expected anger first. A slammed fist, a curse, some visible explosion. But what appeared on Nathan's face was worse. He looked like a man who had just realized the house he had lived in for years was only a stage set. "I suspected," he said at last. "Iris has been different for months. She told me I was imagining things. I convinced myself I was paranoid." I laughed softly, without any joy in it. They always like to make us doubt ourselves. Nathan looked at me differently then, not as a polite acquaintance, but as someone sitting across from another human being who had just had the floor cut out from under her. "Why tonight?" I saw my husband's reservation. I tilted my head toward the table beside ours, still empty. And I thought if my life was going to break apart, I wanted it to break in front of the people who caused it. Nathan turned to look at the neighboring table. The candle had already been lit. 2 champagne glasses waited there. A white envelope lay beside the floral arrangement, tied with a black ribbon. I did not yet know what was inside it, but something in me tightened. A gift, a promise, something prepared with money and betrayal. "I can walk out right now," Nathan said, still staring at that table. "I can choose not to be part of whatever this is." "You can," I said, "and I wouldn't blame you." But if you stay, then at least tonight, neither of them gets to tell the story in the version that protects them." He inhaled deeply and sat up straighter. "Then I'm staying." I nodded, not from triumph. Only because for the first time in days, I felt a little less alone. A waiter brought warm bread to the table. The scent of melted butter rose from it, impossibly rich. Neither of us touched it. 7:28. Then I heard footsteps, a woman's laugh, a man pulling out a chair with practiced charm. Damien and Iris entered my world like actors arriving on time for a scene in which they believed they were the main characters. Iris wore a wine-colored dress with just enough of her shoulders bare, her hair curled softly over them. Damien touched the small of her back as he guided her toward the table. The gesture was so natural, so casual, that it was immediately obvious this was not the first time, not the second time. Perhaps for months now, he had been giving her the attention he always told me he was too tired to offer at home. Then Damien looked up. His eyes landed on me. He froze. Iris stopped an instant later, after seeing Nathan. I had never seen silence take on such a clear shape. It spread from our table to theirs, over the candle, the champagne, the white envelope tied with ribbon, over the faces of two people whose lives had just lost all shelter. I took a sip of water and set the glass down gently. "Perfect timing," I said. And that was the moment every old version of our lives officially ended. There is a special kind of panic that appears only when a lie is forced to stand up under its own weight. Damien found his voice first, but it came out dry and rushed. "Evelyn, what are you doing here?" I have often wondered why cheaters always ask that question, as if the betrayed person is somehow the one who arrived in the wrong place. "I think that question belongs to you," I said. Iris turned toward Nathan, her face drained of color beneath the makeup. "Nathan, this is not what it looks like." Nathan did not stand. He did not shout. He only looked at her with an expression more frightening than anger. "Then what is it?" Damien pulled a chair for Iris automatically, then seemed unsure whether to sit or remain standing himself. "We shouldn't do this here." I tilted my head. "What is inappropriate about here? The candlelight is lovely. The restaurant is quiet. Both married couples are present. Perhaps this is the most honest evening you've had in a year." A few people at distant tables had started glancing over. I never raised my voice. I did not need to. A real collapse does not require noise. Iris stepped toward our table. "Evelyn, I know this looks bad, but do not say my name as though we know each other." That sentence sliced the air more cleanly than any scream. She stopped. Damien lowered his voice and tried for the smooth tone that once made clients trust him. "Honey, just let me explain." I laughed. "Don't, at least not tonight. Don't insult me with that word." Nathan stood then, slowly. He reached into his coat pocket, took out a small brass key, and placed it on the table between us. "I have something to explain, too." Iris's eyes snapped to the key. Her expression changed instantly. Nathan continued, "I found this in your laptop bag last week." Damien looked from the key to Iris, then to me, as if for the first time realizing he no longer controlled the room. Nathan took out his phone and opened a photo. It showed a luxury apartment mid-furnishing, with wide windows overlooking the fictional river in our city, moving boxes stacked in the corner. On the kitchen island sat dried flowers and an unopened bottle of wine. "I followed the address on the receipt I found in your car," Nathan said, his eyes fixed on Iris. "The apartment is under Harbor Crest Residences Holding, the same place you've supposedly been working late these past few months." I felt the blood drain out of me for a second. Harbor Crest. So it was true. Damien opened his mouth. "Nathan, I'm not finished." Nathan turned to me, his tone gentler now, as if he understood what the next part would do to me, too. "I don't know how much you've already uncovered, but I think I know why they picked tonight." He touched the white envelope on Damien's table. "Open it." Damien lunged a step forward. "No." I looked at him, then at the envelope. The way he reacted told me everything. I reached for it. Damien caught my wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, but enough for both of us to realize that for the first time in 17 years, I found his touch revolting. Nathan stepped forward at once. "Take your hand off her." Damien released me. I opened the envelope. Inside was a copy of an interior design deposit agreement for a high-end apartment. Written in the note section were the words, Congratulations on our beginning. No more hiding. The signature beneath it was Damien's. Below that, in fine black ink, was a line from Iris. We should have done this sooner. I did not feel my heart break. I felt it freeze. A year-long affair was humiliating enough, but learning that he had quietly been using money from our joint account to prepare a home for himself and his mistress, that was no longer weakness. That was choice. Deliberate, repeated, coldly planned choice. How long? I asked without looking at Damien. He said nothing. I looked up. I asked you how long. Almost a year, Iris said quietly, as if confession might somehow soften the truth. Nathan closed his eyes for one brief second. When he opened them again, something inside him had gone dark. Damien turned to me immediately. Evelyn, I was going to tell you. I didn't know how to begin. Begin with the money you took from our joint account. I didn't take from you. I lifted the agreement. You used our marriage to furnish an apartment for another woman. Hearing the words out loud still felt surreal, as if I were describing someone else's life. But it was my hand shaking, my voice roughening, my 17 years being reduced to invoices, transfers, and love notes scribbled onto interior contracts. Iris suddenly began to cry. I almost found it laughable. Tears arrive very late for people who have had an entire year to stop. Nathan looked at her. Are you going to apologize? She stammered. I never wanted to hurt you. He answered instantly, very quietly, and yet you still did. The restaurant manager approached then and politely suggested that if needed, we could move to a private room so as not to disturb the other guests. Damien nearly grabbed at the offer like a drowning man grabbing a raft. Yes, let's do that, he said. I looked at him for a long moment. He still believed this was something that could be managed behind a closed door, still believed that if enough people stopped watching, the damage would somehow shrink. I stood up, taking the envelope with me. Fine, I said. Let's go to a private room. Because I was not done. And inside that enclosed room, they would have nowhere left to hide behind candlelight. Velours's private room was small, discreet, and far too elegant for the kind of unveiling about to happen inside it. The walls were paneled in dark walnut. The pendant lights hung low. A vase of white peonies sat on the center of the table, their layered petals thick and soft like lies built over time. Once the door shut behind us, the piano from the main dining room disappeared. It was just the four of us and the truth. Damien pulled out a chair, but no one sat right away. I stood at the head of the table with the envelope still in my hand. Nathan stood opposite me like a silent pillar. Iris had stopped crying, though gray smudges had appeared at the outer corners of her mascara, and for the first time, her polished perfection looked like something hastily painted over. I'll speak first, Damien said, not to excuse any of this, just to explain. I looked at him. You have exactly 3 minutes. He blinked. In 17 years of marriage, Damien had probably never seen me this cold. Me and Iris. He swallowed. It started with work, long projects, travel, pressure. We talked a lot. Then it went too far. Too far, I repeated. Is that what you call a year-long affair and a secret apartment? I know you're angry. Do not reduce this to anger. I stepped forward and placed the contract on the table. I am not angry because you had a moment of weakness. I am angry because you turned betrayal into a plan, every message, every transfer, every lie to my face. Nathan pulled out a chair and sat down, hands clasped together, and every lie to mine. Iris finally spoke. I never meant to steal anything from anyone. I turned toward her. You slept with my husband for nearly a year and helped choose furnishings for an apartment funded by my joint account. If that's not theft, what exactly would you call it? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Damien stepped in quickly. I'll pay that money back. Such a stupid sentence, such a man's sentence, as though money could restore things that had been violated. Wonderful, I said. And how exactly do you plan to repay me? With another year of my life, another intact marriage, the ability to trust after you've destroyed it? His jaw tightened. Evelyn, things between us had been cold for a long time. There it was, the blame. I had almost been waiting for it. If things between us were cold, I said, you could have spoken, you could have chosen counseling, you could have chosen separation, you could have chosen to leave with the bare minimum of honesty. What you chose was to sleep beside me every night while building another life behind my back. The room felt so heavy I could hear the air conditioning. Nathan pulled out his phone then and opened a folder. I have a few things I'd like to clarify too. Iris looked at him, fear now obvious. Nathan, he did not look at her. Last week, after finding the key, I checked the tablet at home. I'm not the type to snoop, but it turns out that if you're lied to long enough, you start doing things you once believed were beneath you. I understood that feeling perfectly. Nathan set the phone on the table and rotated the screen toward us. It showed screenshots of emails between Iris and Damien, not just messages about meeting up. They were discussing how to wait for the right moment to leave their marriages, how to protect their reputations at the firm, how to avoid looking like the cause of professional disruption. One email from Damien said, "Evelyn won't suspect anything. She always chooses peace." I read that sentence without blinking. He had bet the future of his affair on my decency. How ugly that was. Nathan scrolled again. Another email from Iris appeared. "Nathan never looks too closely. As long as we keep the schedule tight, he won't notice." Nathan gave a small, bitter laugh. Apparently, both of you understood us very well. For the first time that evening, Damien looked genuinely rattled. "Nathan, those emails are your words." Iris placed one hand on the table. "I never thought it would become this." I looked at her for a long moment. "Then what did you think would happen? The two of you move into the apartment, and the two of us sit at home blaming ourselves for not keeping our marriages together?" She started crying again, but this time I did not feel hatred. I felt tired. Tears could not save anything now. Damien tried a different strategy. His voice softened as he turned back toward me, as if the real conversation was still between husband and wife. "Evelyn, I still care about you." I laughed, not loudly, just enough to hear the fracture inside it myself. "Care?" I said. "You're using that word after financing a new home for another woman with our money?" He lowered his head. For a rare moment, he no longer looked polished, controlled, or admired. He no longer looked like the man everyone assumed was dependable. He looked exactly like what he was, a selfish man caught in direct light. I opened my handbag and took out the blue velvet ring box. Damien looked up when I placed it in front of him. "I took off my ring before I came here," I said. "This marriage ended the moment you decided my trust was a resource you could spend." He stared at the box as if it were a wound he had not anticipated. "Don't do this," he whispered. "I'm not doing anything. You already did it." Nathan stood then. "I think I'm done too." Iris panicked. "Nathan, please." He took a step back. "Don't beg for what you chose not to protect." That sentence hung in the room sharp as broken glass. I looked from Nathan to Damien, then to Iris, and right then I understood that the reversal had begun. Not because I had shouted louder, not because I was winning through drama, but because two people who had grown comfortable lying in darkness were now being forced to see one another under real light. Damien was no longer a man deciding between two women. He was a man who had just lost the only person who had ever loved him with complete faith, and this was only the beginning. We left Velour without eating the main course. It felt appropriate. Some dinners are not meant to feed people. They are meant to strip them bare. Outside the restaurant, the evening wind moved through the trees lining the street. Headlights swept across the damp pavement in yellow streaks. Nathan stood beneath the awning and adjusted his cuff as if neatness might somehow keep the body from falling apart after something like that. "I'm sorry," I said, "for dragging you into this way." He looked at me for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I think I needed to see it with my own eyes. Otherwise, I might have kept convincing myself I had misunderstood." I nodded. "I know." Through the restaurant glass, I could still make out Damien trying to speak to Iris. The two of them suddenly looked so small, so ordinary. Betrayal had covered them in a certain dangerous glow, something secretive and intoxicating. But once the secret was exposed, they were just two adults with poor character standing inside the consequences of their own choices. Nathan reached into his pocket and handed me a business card. "I'm going to need a lawyer. You probably will too." I took it. "I've already been thinking about that." He hesitated a second, then added, "If you need copies of the emails or the apartment photos, I'll send them. I don't want this to become some childish revenge game, but I also don't want them to have the chance to distort the truth." I looked at him, and for the first time that night, I felt something that was not destruction, a kind of steady kindness, quiet, undramatic. "Thank you," he nodded. "Get home safely, Evelyn." I almost laughed at how courteous that sounded after the hell we had just walked through. But that courtesy was exactly what saved me from feeling like the entire world had turned rotten. When I got home, Damien was not back yet. I walked through the living room, past the sofa where we had once fallen asleep beside each other on slow weekend nights, past the framed wedding photo above the fireplace. In it, I wore a simple white dress, and Damien looked at me as if there had never been anything else he wanted. I picked up the frame. The glass was cold. The smile inside it now looked like a dead language. I did not smash it. I simply turned it face down. Then I went upstairs and took out a suitcase. It is strange how packing up 17 years starts with tiny things. An ivory toothbrush, the blue notebook where I always scribbled lecture ideas, the amber perfume my mother gave me for my 40th birthday, the cream sweater worn soft at the cuffs because I had loved it so much. I did not take everything, only the things that still belonged to the part of my life he had not contaminated. In the bottom drawer, I found the family financial files. I packed them. From the small safe in my office, I took the house documents, passports, account statements, investment records. Not because I wanted war, but because I had learned something tonight. Betrayers do not just take affection, they take time, stability, and if you are careless, even your right to tell your own story correctly. It was close to midnight when Damien came home. He stopped in the bedroom doorway and stared at the open suitcase on the bed. He looked exhausted, worn down, but I was no longer the woman responsible for soothing that face. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To my sister's place for a few days." "You can't just pack up and leave like this." I looked at him. "You've been using our money to prepare another apartment. Don't tell me what can't be done." He stepped inside and lowered his voice. "I know I was wrong, but this doesn't have to be beyond saving. From your perspective, maybe not. From mine, you already buried it." Damien pushed a hand through his hair, his tell whenever he lost control. "Evelyn, listen to me. I lost my way. I got pulled into—" "You were not pulled. You walked." He fell silent. I zipped the suitcase. The sound was sharp and final. "Are you going to tell people?" he asked after a moment. There it was. At last, the thing he truly feared. Not my pain. Not the collapse of our marriage, but his image. "I will tell the truth to the people who need to know," I said. "Both families, my lawyer, and any institution connected to our shared finances or the professional consequences of what you did. I do not need to invent anything extra in order for you to look bad. The truth is enough. Don't ruin my life." I looked at the man who had quietly dismantled mine and still wanted gentleness in return. "Damien," I said softly, "you're mistaken. I'm not ruining anything. I'm just no longer covering it for you." I lifted my suitcase and walked past him. As I brushed by, I caught that familiar cedar and bergamot cologne again, but this time it no longer smelled like home. It smelled like ashes. At the doorway, he called after me, his voice breaking for the first time. "Will you come back?" I did not turn around. Because some questions no longer deserve answers once the person asking them has made their betrayal unmistakably clear. 3 days later, I sat in a divorce lawyer's office. The room had windows overlooking the fictional city square, where early season trees were dropping yellow leaves across the sidewalks. My attorney was Marian Kessler, a woman in her 50s with a voice so calm it sounded like polished metal. She wasted no words, showed no pity, and that helped me breathe more easily than any hug could have. "I need you to tell this in order," she said, opening a legal pad. "The affair, the joint account, the apartment, every piece of documentation you have." So I did. Each detail came out of my mouth like a shard of glass. The messages, the reservation, the key to the apartment, the furnishing deposit, the automatic transfers, the email in which Damien had written that I always choose peace. As I spoke, Marian wrote. Occasionally, she interrupted only to ask one short question about timing or documentation. When I finished, she nodded. "Good. You did the right thing by leaving temporarily and keeping the records. First, we freeze any abnormal movement involving the joint account and send formal notice through counsel. Second, we protect the story with documents, not with emotion. Documents, not emotion. I held on to that like a rein. I did not want to become the ugliest version of myself just because Damien had become the most cowardly version of himself. That afternoon, I emailed both sets of parents and my sister. No sensationalism, no embellishment, just the truth in clean lines. Damien had been involved in a year-long affair. There were signs that he had used money from our joint account on a secret apartment. I had moved out and was now working with legal counsel. I did not ask anyone to choose sides. I simply refused to keep wearing the mask that protected him. The responses came fast. My mother called first, crying. My sister, Leona Ashford, appeared at the apartment door with hot soup and a new set of pajamas. Damien's parents were so shocked they could barely form sentences. His mother finally whispered, "He wasn't raised to live like this." It was a painful, useless sentence, but at least it was not denial. Damien called repeatedly. I did not answer. He left voicemails. His voice sounded tired, desperate, sometimes almost angry in his panic. I listened to exactly one, then deleted it. Not because I felt nothing, but because I understood that those messages were not really for me. They were attempts to save his reflection from the disgust of what he had become. Nathan was different. He sent me the complete email folder, the photos of the apartment, and copies of a few invoices Iris had carelessly left on her desk at home. At the end of his email was a single line. "I don't want to prolong this, but I believe you have the right to know everything." I thanked him. A few days later, Callow and Reed received notice from their internal legal department that because the relationship between two employees on overlapping projects could affect transparency and review procedures, an inquiry was necessary. I did not send a vindictive letter to Damien's firm, but once my attorney raised questions about suspicious transfers tied to false work schedules and shared assets, the truth naturally reached exactly where it needed to go. Truth has a way of finding its own route. Damien began to panic. One rainy evening, he came to Leona's apartment and stood outside the door like a man who had lost the map back to his own life. Leona looked at me. I nodded, and she led him into the living room. He looked awful. Wrinkled coat, dark circles under his eyes, none of the polished control he had worn at Velours. "I just want to talk," Damien said. "I'm listening." He glanced around the small apartment, then back at me. "Iris and I are over." I almost laughed. "And you think that changes what, exactly?" "At least it proves I'm serious about fixing this." "You don't fix betrayal by abandoning the third person after you get caught." He clenched his hands. "What do you want me to do?" That question reminded me of all the years I had bent myself to keep our marriage comfortable. What did I want? I had once wanted a husband who told the truth. A man who spoke up when he stopped loving me instead of secretly financing a new home with another woman. But that man was not standing in front of me. "I want you to cooperate," I said. "Financial transparency, the paperwork signed when needed, and stop pretending you're the victim of circumstance." Damien stared at me as if it had only just occurred to him that he no longer had the right to negotiate using emotion. "You're being cruel," he said softly. I gave a small laugh. "No, I'm just no longer being gentle." He stood up slowly. Before leaving, he turned back, eyes red. "I thought you would be the last person to ever leave me," I answered without changing my expression. "I also thought I'd be the first person you would protect." Then he left, and the room fell quiet again, except for the rain against the window. That night, I sat alone beside a mug of ginger tea, gone cold. There was no triumph in any of this, only the emptiness that follows a building collapse. But in the middle of that wreckage, I realized that the first thing I was reclaiming was not my husband, not my reputation, not even a perfect apology. It was my right to decide how I would live after being betrayed. And once you get that right back, everything starts shifting. In the weeks that followed, Damien's and Iris's lives did not explode all at once. They cracked in sections. That is what real karma looks like. Not a lightning strike, but everything built on lies quietly starting to come loose from its place. Damien moved into a short-term rental. Our shared house was assessed in preparation for division. The thing I once thought would kill me turned out to unfold through cold procedures, signatures, statements, emails, appointment times, document boxes. The biggest emotions of a collapse often have to pass through the most impersonal machinery. Iris took an extended leave from Callow and Reed while the internal review continued. No one in this fictional city needed me to run around telling the story for them. People pieced things together from what they themselves could see. Two colleagues who were always mysteriously working late together, both suddenly removed from projects, both linked to financial inconsistencies and false work schedules. I did not launch any campaign against them. I simply stopped laying a cloth over the stain. One afternoon, Nathan invited me for coffee. We met at a small place called Copper Finch, where low windows held hanging ferns and the waffles always smelled like butter. He was already there, sitting beside a wooden bridge model he was still working on. His coffee had nearly gone cold. "How are you holding up?" he asked. I looked down at my tea. "Depends on the day." He nodded like someone who knew exactly what that meant. We did not talk like two people rushing toward romance. There was nothing like that yet. We were simply two people who understood what it felt like to wake at 3 in the morning and need a few seconds to remember why your chest felt so heavy. Two people who understood how passing a shirt that still smelled like an old familiar cologne could ruin the rest of the day. Two people who understood the absurd shame victims feel, as though being deceived were somehow a personal failure. Nathan told me Iris had been trying to get him back. She called it a period of confusion, said that we had already lost each other before this. He smiled bitterly when he repeated it. The strange thing is, even in her excuses, she still speaks in the plural, as though her choices were some shared accident. I exhaled slowly. Damien does the same thing. Always, we grew apart. Things were difficult, as if his affair were just a weather pattern. Nathan looked at me and smiled for the first time since we had met. "You've kept your sense of irony. That's a good sign." I smiled too. Lightly, honestly. It was a tiny moment, but I remember it clearly, because after weeks of lawyers, documents, and poisoned memories, it was the first time I sat across from someone who did not ask me to forgive, did not pressure me to soften, did not need me to become agreeable so his story could feel less ugly. He was just there. Meanwhile, Damien's real nature became more obvious to the people who had once defended him. He started telling different versions of the same story. To one person, it had been a short mistake. To another, our marriage had supposedly been dead for years. To the attorneys, he tried minimizing the seriousness of the financial transfers. Every version cost him another little piece of credibility. Truth does not only hurt the betrayer, it exhausts them, because they have to keep remembering which lie they told yesterday. One evening, Damien's father called me. He apologized for his son, which is something no father should have to do. Then he paused for a long time before saying, "He keeps insisting none of this was that serious, but a person who lies for that long can't call it losing his footing." I sat there watching raindrops slide down Leona's apartment window. I know. After that call, I felt something loosen inside me, not because I needed to be vindicated, but because at last, someone had called what Damien did by its right name. Not confusion, not weakness, not a rough patch, deliberate betrayal. A few weeks later, during our first financial mediation session, Damien walked in looking slightly more put together again. But then he saw me. I wore a cream-colored suit, my hair pinned neatly back, my folders aligned in order in front of me. No tears, no dramatic fury, no chaos for him to cling to, only order. I saw the confusion flash across his face. Maybe he had expected me to break down for so long that he would still have a chance to cast himself as the rescuer. But the woman sitting across from him that day was no longer the wife who waited for the porch light to calm down. I looked directly at him and said in the most even tone possible, "Let's stick to the documents. Nobody needs a performance in this room." Damien did not answer immediately, and I knew in that moment that the person who had truly lost power was not me. The final mediation session took place on a cold morning nearly a year after the night at Velours. It was early spring in our fictional city. Trees were just beginning to bud, but the wind still felt thin and sharp. I walked into the office building with a strange kind of peace, as if the pain that had chased me for months had finally grown tired and stopped somewhere behind me. I was no longer living in Leona's apartment. I had rented a small place of my own near campus, with a balcony full of herbs and a long bookshelf running across one wall. I was teaching normally again. I was sleeping better. Not every night, but more often than before. Wounds do not vanish at once. They just slowly stop dictating your breathing. Damien arrived 7 minutes late. He used to hate lateness in other people. That day, he walked in with his hair slightly out of place, tie a little off-center, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. It is strange to watch a man who once controlled everything become rumpled by his own life. The attorneys went through the final details: the house, the accounts, the reimbursements, the transfer schedule. There were no screams, no movie scene breakdowns, just consequences, neatly stacked into files and read aloud. When the signatures were done, Damien asked if he could speak to me privately for a moment. Marion looked at me. I nodded. We stood in a long hallway lined with gray carpet, where the light from a window at the far end stretched in a pale band across the floor. It was quiet enough to hear the hum of the ventilation like distant wind. Damien turned a pen over in his hand, an old habit whenever he was nervous. I don't know how to begin. I almost smiled. You used that line at Velour. He lowered his head. I know. Silence. I've lost almost everything, he said. My work isn't what it was. Friends look at me differently. My parents are disappointed. And... He hesitated. Iris left a long time ago, too. I did not respond. That information no longer pierced me the way it once would have. It was just another stone falling into place after someone had shoved an entire house too close to the edge. Damien drew in a deep breath. I'm not saying this to make you feel sorry for me. I want you to know I understand that I destroyed the only thing in my life that was genuinely valuable. I looked at him for a long moment. There had been a time when a sentence like that would have softened me immediately. But that is the truth about betrayal. Once you have watched someone lie to you with skill and practice, their regret no longer feels magical. It just sounds late. I believe you regret it, I said, but I no longer confuse that with love. His eyes reddened. Did you ever think, if I had told you earlier, would things have been different? I looked toward the window at the end of the hall, where the early spring sky was a washed-out blue. Yes, they would have. He looked up as if catching hold of some last scrap of hope. I turned back to him. If you had been honest from the start, you still would have been a man who hurt me. But instead, you chose to become a man who hurt me and also underestimated me. The color drained from his face. I stepped a little closer, close enough that he could hear every word clearly. You did not lose me the night I found the messages. You lost me the first time you lied and still came home to eat dinner like nothing had happened. Damien closed his eyes. I knew that sentence would stay with him for a long time, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. He whispered, I'm sorry. I nodded once. I heard you. Then I turned away. Nathan was waiting for me in the seating area near the lobby, not as a savior, not as a reward for suffering, just as a man who had walked beside me through the most chaotic months of my life without demanding that I heal on his schedule. We had come together slowly, very slowly. It began with coffee, with silences, with dinners that held no secrets. Trust did not return like fireworks. It grew back like grass after fire. He stood when he saw me. Is it done? Nathan asked. I looked outside, where a thin strip of sunlight had just fallen across the steps beyond the building. It's done. He held out his hand. I took it. His hand was warm and steady, not because it promised never to hurt me, but because it had never once demanded that I pretend not to hurt. As we stepped outside, I did not turn back to look for Damien again. Some doors do not need to be slammed. Once you stop walking through them, they become the past on their own. 1 year after the night at Velour, I saw Damien again at a university fundraiser, not in a dim restaurant full of artificial candlelight, but in a brightly lit hall where there was no dark corner left for lies to hide. I was standing near a display of rare books, holding a glass of sparkling water and speaking with a colleague about a new scholarship proposal. I wore a moss green dress, my hair loose over my shoulders, and for the first time in a very long while, I was not thinking about how I looked under other people's eyes. That kind of freedom is something only those who have spent too long under betrayal's scrutiny can fully understand. Then I saw Damien. He stood near the reception table, a little thinner than before, still in an elegant suit, but without the quiet confidence that used to move ahead of him like an aura. A few people greeted him politely, but no one gathered around him the way they once had. Reputation rarely dies in one day. It just quietly stops being cherished. When our eyes met, he hesitated. I did not feel my heart drop. I did not feel dizzy. I did not feel anger rise in me. I simply saw a man I had once loved deeply, now placed exactly where he belonged in my life. A sad, expensive chapter, but one that had already ended. He walked over and stopped at a polite distance. "Evelyn." I nodded. "Damien." He looked at me for a few seconds, perhaps searching for something, hurt, resentment, the softness I used to carry for him, but the only thing he found was peace, and I think that may have been the most painful thing for him to see. "You look well," he said. "I am well." He gave a faint smile, as if he had just absorbed a small but perfectly aimed wound. "I'm glad to hear that." I did not ask how he was doing, not out of cruelty, but because I was no longer responsible for carrying the weight of his consequences. Just then, Nathan joined us. He had been speaking with members of the organizing committee about a community library design project his studio was developing with the university. White shirt, dark blue blazer, slim glasses in hand, still that same quiet steadiness. Still the man who entered my life not through grand promises, but through small consistency repeated so many times that eventually I learned how to breathe normally beside him. Nathan stopped next to me. "Everything okay?" I smiled. "Everything's fine." Damien looked at both of us. No introduction was necessary. He understood, not because Nathan and I were displaying anything, but because the calm between two adults who truly respect one another is always visible, especially to someone who once threw it away. A brief silence passed. Then Damien said softly, "I hope you're happy." I looked at him, and for the first time, I answered without any effort at all. "I'm not just happy," I said. "I'm at peace." That was the best ending I could have given us. Not, "You'll regret this forever," though perhaps he would. Not, "You lost the best thing you ever had," though that was true too. Just something simpler. I made it through betrayal without losing my dignity. Damien nodded, as if accepting a sentence that had long since become obvious. Then he walked away. I watched him for 1 second, then turned back to the present. Around me were voices, clinking glasses, the scent of old paper and white flowers from the hall. An ordinary evening, a normal event. And for me, that very ordinariness was the victory. On the drive home, Nathan took the riverside road slowly. The window was cracked open, and the early evening air carried the scent of water and wildflowers. The city lights stretched over the river like threads of gold. I rested my hand against the door and watched everything move past, and suddenly I thought of the woman I had been 1 year earlier, sitting in the dressing room, removing her ring, heart being crushed, but her back still straight. I wanted to hold her. I wanted to tell her that the dinner would not be the end of her life, that being betrayed did not make her less valuable, that a lying man had no right to decide whether she was still worthy of love, that some losses are actually hidden doors leading you back to yourself. Nathan placed his hand over mine. "What are you thinking about?" I turned toward him, then looked out at the river one more time. "I'm thinking that sometimes things break open not to end, but to let the light in." He smiled. "That sounds exactly like you." I laughed, softly, honestly, and that is what I want to keep from all of this. Not the revenge dinner, not the moment they went pale when they saw us, not the collapse of the two people who had chosen deception, but this feeling. The feeling of sitting in a car, heading toward a home, no longer filled with secrets, beside a man who never makes me doubt my own instincts, and knowing that self-respect was never supposed to be the price of keeping love. If love requires you to sacrifice the truth in order to survive, then it is not love. And if betrayal forces you to stand up, choose yourself again and learn to love yourself so completely that you stop accepting scraps, then sometimes pain is not the end. Sometimes it is only the first door leading you into a cleaner life.